Shannon Doherty burned through every room she ever walked into. Some people just carry that kind of charge. Burt Bacharach wrote melodies that made complicated emotions feel inevitable. Craft disguised as ease, the hardest trick in any art form. Freddie Mercury. Robbie Coltrane could fill a scene with warmth and menace at the same time, a rare thing in any actor. Marilyn Monroe became a symbol so large that the actual human being underneath nearly disappeared. The distance between the icon and the person is always worth examining. James Earl Jones, a voice that carried authority, gravity, history, without ever needing to raise it. There is a speech that people still pull up on their phones, years after it was delivered, not because of nostalgia, but because it still sounds like an argument worth having. The 2004 Democratic National Convention keynote. Barack Obama was a state senator from Illinois at the time, not yet a U.S. senator, certainly not a president. He walked to that podium in Boston carrying a manuscript almost nobody outside his circle had read. What came out of that room changed the architecture of American political ambition. There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. It's a line people have argued about ever since. Some hear it as a genuine philosophical commitment. Others hear it as the most sophisticated political branding of a generation. Both readings are probably right, and the tension between them is, in many ways, the tension at the center of Obama's entire public life. He was born in Honolulu in 1961. His father, Barack Obama Sr., was a Kenyan economist who had come to Hawaii on a scholarship. His mother, Ann Dunham, was a white woman from Kansas who would go on to become an anthropologist. The marriage lasted only a few years. His father left when Obama was 2, returned for one visit when Obama was 10, and died in a car accident in Kenya in 1982. Obama grew up in Hawaii and for a stretch in Indonesia, raised largely by his mother and, crucially, by his maternal grandparents, Madeline and Stanley Dunham, who he called Toot and Gramps. Hawaii in the 1960s and 70s was not the mainland. Its particular racial and cultural mix gave Obama an upbringing that was neither straightforwardly Black American nor straightforwardly anything else. He has written candidly, in Dreams from My Father, published in 1995, before he was famous, about the genuine confusion of identity that came with that background. The book is not a political document. It is a literary one, searching, sometimes uncomfortable, written by a young man trying to understand what category of American he was. It remains one of the more honest memoirs produced by any major political figure, precisely because it was written before the political incentives to be dishonest had fully kicked in. He went to Occidental College, transferred to Columbia University, graduated in 1983, and then spent 2 years working as a community organizer in Chicago's South Side, a decision that was neither glamorous nor obviously strategic. The neighborhoods he worked in, around the Altgeld Gardens housing project, were dealing with plant closures, asbestos contamination, and the slow withdrawal of municipal attention. The job was grinding. Results were incremental at best. Obama has described that period as one of the most clarifying of his life, an education in how institutions actually function, how change actually resists itself, how good intentions run into bureaucratic reality. He went to Harvard Law School, became the first Black president of the Harvard Law Review in 1990, a role that generated a small burst of national attention. Graduated magna cum laude and returned to Chicago. He could have gone to almost any major law firm in the country. He went back to community law. He taught constitutional law at the University of Chicago for 12 years. He ran for the Illinois State Senate in 1996 and won. The state Senate years are often skipped over in the Obama story, treated as prelude. That's a mistake. It's where he developed the legislative instincts that would define his presidency. He worked on ethics reform, on criminal justice legislation, including a bill requiring police to record interrogations. And he worked across party lines with a Republican colleague named Kirk Dillard on welfare reform. Illinois state politics is rough. The Chicago Democratic machine was not friendly to independent operators. Obama navigated it with a combination of genuine charm and cold-eyed calculation that his supporters called pragmatism and his critics called opportunism. Both again contain some truth. In 2000, he made a serious miscalculation. He challenged the incumbent U.S. Congressman Bobby Rush in a Democratic primary. Rush, a former Black Panther and a genuine South Side institution, beat him by 30 points. It was a humiliation that Obama has spoken about honestly, a case of ambition outrunning both timing and political reality. He went back to Springfield. He kept working. 3 years later, he was running for the U.S. Senate. The 2004 Senate race was shaped by extraordinary luck. His original Republican opponent, Jack Ryan, withdrew from the race after sealed divorce records were released, revealing embarrassing allegations. The Illinois Republican Party, in some desperation, recruited Alan Keyes, a conservative commentator from Maryland, to run against Obama. It was not a competitive race. Obama won with 70% of the vote. And then came Boston. After the 2004 convention speech, the machinery around Obama began moving fast. His memoir was reissued and became a bestseller. He was sworn into the U.S. Senate in January 2005. By 2006, the conversation about 2008 had already started. Most of his Senate colleagues and party strategists thought it was far too soon, that he needed a decade in the Senate, that Hillary Clinton was the presumptive nominee, that the country was not ready. Obama listened to all of that and announced his candidacy in February 2007 in Springfield, Illinois, in front of the old state capitol, in weather so cold his breath fogged the air. The 2008 campaign was, by almost any measure, one of the most remarkable in American political history. Hillary Clinton was better known, better funded, and had the support of most of the Democratic establishment. Obama's campaign bet on caucus states, on young voters, on a grassroots fundraising model that had never been tested at that scale. He lost New Hampshire after winning Iowa. He won South Carolina. He gave a speech after that primary loss in New Hampshire, not a concession speech, a rallying speech, built around the phrase, "Yes, we can," which became something close to a cultural phenomenon. The primary dragged into June. He won. Against John McCain in the general election, he faced questions about experience, about associations, Jeremiah Wright, William Ayers, that his campaign navigated with varying degrees of grace and damage control. The Wright controversy was the most serious. Obama's pastor of 20 years had made incendiary statements from the pulpit. Obama addressed it in a speech in Philadelphia in March 2008, a more perfect union, that his team thought might end the campaign. Instead, it became one of the most discussed speeches about race in American political history. He did not disown his pastor initially. He disowned him later, when Wright gave a press conference that made the political cost too high. The sequence revealed both the depth of Obama's rhetorical skill and the pragmatic calculations underneath it. He was elected on November 4, 2008. He was 47 years old. He was the first black president of the United States. The weight of that fact does not get smaller with repetition. He inherited an economy in free fall. The financial crisis was at its acute phase. The auto industry was near collapse. He had been in office roughly 3 weeks when his economic team was telling him that without intervention, unemployment could reach 25%. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus bill, passed in February 2009, with no Republican House votes and 3 Republican Senate votes. It was, by most independent economic assessments, effective at stabilizing the economy, but politically it set the tone. The era of hoped-for post-partisan cooperation was over before it had begun. The Affordable Care Act, which his opponents named Obamacare, and which he eventually embraced, consumed the first 18 months of his presidency. The fight was brutal. The bill that passed was not the bill he wanted. There was no public option. The process involved deals that were ugly up close. The Cornhusker kickback, the Louisiana Purchase, procedural maneuvers that gave Republicans sustained ammunition. But when it passed in March 2010, it represented the largest expansion of health insurance coverage since Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. About 20 million people gained coverage. The political cost was also real. The 2010 midterm elections delivered a historic loss of Democratic seats. Foreign policy produced its own set of contradictions. Obama accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in December 2009, 9 months into his presidency, an award that puzzled even some of his admirers. In his acceptance speech, he gave a defense of just war theory that was simultaneously one of his most intellectually serious public moments and one of the most awkward in the history of the prize. He authorized the surge in Afghanistan while already thinking about the exit. He authorized drone strikes at a pace that shocked civil libertarians. He ordered the raid that killed Osama bin Laden in May 2011, a decision he has described as the longest night of his presidency, 40 minutes in which the mission could have ended in catastrophe. He ended the Iraq War. He negotiated the Iran nuclear deal, which his successor dismantled. He restored diplomatic relations with Cuba after 50 years. He drew a red line on Syria's use of chemical weapons, and then did not enforce it, a moment that many foreign policy analysts cite as a significant erosion of American credibility in the region, and one that Obama himself has given complicated, evolving answers about. His second term was defined less by legislative achievement — the Republican House made that nearly impossible — and more by executive action, cultural signage, and a grinding series of crises. The rise of ISIS, the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, mass shootings that produced emotional presidential addresses, and no legislative response. He wept at the podium after Sandy Hook. He gave a eulogy in Charleston in 2015 after a white supremacist killed 9 black churchgoers and sang Amazing Grace in the middle of it, an unscripted moment that became one of the most remembered of his presidency. The Obama presidency existed inside a paradox that historians are still working through. He was a president who inspired extraordinary hope, who governed with considerable intelligence and discipline, and who left office with the country more polarized than when he entered. His signature legislative achievement was gutted by his successor. The coalition he built delivered the White House, and then, 8 years later, failed to hold it. The country he described in 2004, not red states, not blue states, was more divided by the time he left in January 2017 than at almost any point in recent memory. What he built that has lasted is harder to quantify. The cultural fact of his presidency, that it happened, that his daughters grew up in the White House, that a generation of American children formed their first image of the presidency around a black family, is not nothing. It is, in fact, considerable. Since leaving office, Obama has stayed engaged without the constant visibility of some of his predecessors. He produced content through Higher Ground Productions, his production company with Michelle Obama. He published A Promised Land in 2020, the first volume of his presidential memoir, a meticulous, sometimes exhaustively honest account of his first term. He has campaigned for Democratic candidates, though with an awareness that his presence is not always the asset it once was in certain geographies. He gave a long and pointed speech at the 2024 Democratic National Convention, supporting Kamala Harris, that reminded observers of exactly how rare his particular combination of intellect and oratory remains in American politics. He is in his early 60s. He plays golf. He surfs. He reads obsessively. He has said in multiple interviews that he considers the presidency the most consequential chapter of his life, but not the final one. What makes Barack Obama a genuinely complicated subject, which is to say, a genuinely interesting one, is that the story does not resolve cleanly. He was a transformative figure who did not transform everything he wanted to transform. He was an idealist who governed as a pragmatist and sometimes disappointed both camps. He raised expectations to an almost impossible height and then lived inside the gap between what he promised and what the machinery of government and politics would allow. That gap is the most honest thing about his legacy, and it is the thing that makes him worth taking seriously, still, as someone whose full story is not yet written.